Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Further Evaluation Workshop for Cape Lookout Marine Conservation Area. My name is Andy Lanier. I'm the Marine Affairs Coordinator for the Department of Land Conservation and Development. It is the morning of April 28th, it's a Thursday. This is our second day of workshops. The workshops for Fogarty Creek and Cape Foulweather happened yesterday. A workshop for Blacklock Point happens this afternoon at 1 o'clock, and the workout for Ecola and Chapman Points begins at 12:30 tomorrow. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to take us into our agenda. So we're going to spend some time with introductions this morning. We don't have too big of a group, so we'll go through everybody, and I will lead those. And we'll introduce our panelists for the day first, and then we'll go into members of the public. We will have a public comment session after that. I'll talk a little bit about tribal consultation, give an overview of our government-to-government responsibilities in association with this part of the process. And then we will move into our Rocky Habitat proposal presentation from the Cape Lookout proposal team. That will be followed by a short break, and then we'll get into the meat of our conversation today, which is to talk about the recommendations, the evaluation of the Cape Lookout site, and have a discussion about those site considerations. I have added officially a public comment period after that discussion because I am keeping the discussion focused between our panelists today. And I know that can sometimes be frustrating if you have a perspective or point of view that you'd like to share, but are not able to actually join in that conversation. So we have an opportunity towards the end of our workshop today for that to happen. And then I will conclude with a workshop wrap up and next steps, and hopefully adjourn. It seems I may have overestimated the amount of time for some of the workshops. We ended early yesterday. I'm not going to promise that, but I think that we will have enough time for a fruitful discussion, and maybe we'll be able to give you a little bit of time back on your morning today. So I'm going to actually stop sharing at the moment so I can see everyone's faces and have folks tiled. There is a chat. I'll sort that out in a bit. But for now, I'm going to go into the introduction of our panelists, and I'm going to begin with who I see first on my screen, Steve Griffiths.
Hi, I'm Steve Griffiths, and I'm on the board of Lincoln City Audubon.
Thank you. Kent?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Kent Doughty. I'm the Coastal Conservation Coordinator for Audubon Society of Lincoln City.
Don.
Hi, Dawn Viascusa, and I'm the president at Lincoln City Audubon, and I'm mostly going to sit and be quiet today.
And I saw Jim Carlson. There you are.
Morning, everyone. Jim Carlson, Coast Range Association, Marine Issues.
Thank you. Does that get everyone who's a panelist for the Cape Lookout team? I think it does. Yep. Okay, moving on to agency staff. I see Laurel and then Jason.
Morning, everybody. Laurel Hillman, Oregon Parks and Recreation Department, Ocean Shore Specialist. Nice to see everybody again.
Jason?
I forget I had to unmute there. Jason, good morning. I'm Jason Elkins, the park manager here at Cape Lookout State Park.
Thank you. Sean Stevenson.
Sean Stevenson, wildlife biologist, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, thanks.
Michael.
Good morning, folks. I'm Michael Moses. I'm Department of Land Conservation and Development, former Rocky Shores coordinator.
And Dave Fox.
Yeah, hi, everyone. I'm Dave Fox, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife Marine Resources Program. Thanks.
Okay, and the last staff I see is Mandy.
Hello, I'm Oregon Coastal Management Department Programs Administrative Support.
Thank you, Mandy. Laurel, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I just wanted to say there's a strange chat in the chat to me. Did anybody else get that? I don't know. I know that there's been some issues with people hijacking
I did
Zoom,
get a,
so just maybe don't click on the link. I don't know
Yeah.
if it's spam or not spam or what's going on. I'm just like putting a flag out there to folks. I don't know if it's a real person. I don't see them in the meeting anymore, but just FYI, maybe don't click on that link. I don't know.
Yeah, I got it too. I agree. Don't click on it.
It was a direct link I got to me as well, so we will flag that as maybe trouble. So move on without giving that any more time or air.
Okay.
Thank you, Laurel. Moving on then to members of the public. First I see is Peggy.
Good morning, I'm Peggy Joyce. I am a member of the board of OPAC.
And then Joseph.
Good morning, everyone. Joseph Yoren, Audubon Society of Lincoln City.
Thank you. And Jamie Faraday.
Jamie Faraday, Coastal at Large, OPAC.
Thank you. Kurt.
Hi, I'm Kurt Grote. I'm a recreational freediver based out of Portland, but I dive at Cape Lookout about 20 days a year, so really have a lot of fondness for the site.
Great, thank you. Dick.
Morning, everybody. Dick Vanderschaft with the Nature Conservancy. I was a member of the Rocky Habitat Working Group.
Thank you, Dick. Joe, Leavesite.
Thanks, Andy. Joe Leavesite. I'm with Portland Audubon, and I'm on OPAC, the statewide conservation seat.
Great. Margaret.
Margaret Corby, OPAC tribal representative.
Thank you, Margaret. And John Holloway.
John Holloway, North Coast Recreational Fishing, OPAC.
Thank you, John. Did I miss anybody? I think I got everyone. Okay. Well, thank you all and welcome again to our workshop this morning. I will share my screen and get back into our program. So first, I just want to say that, and the workshops yesterday, I think were wonderful in this regard, but we had a productive discussion where everyone was respectful of each other. I think we had very active listening, and that's really important to avoid conflict. Please refrain from any kind of personal attacks. And if we express opinions, please express your opinion with an understanding of the why, so that we can understand the root cause of concern or understanding about issues. And as a group, it will be helpful if we can, where possible, our panelists leave our cameras on during the discussion. That will help everybody track the course of the conversation, and to me provides a focus point for those of us who in our virtual world are kind of maintaining attention on the computer screen here. So we have a public comment opportunity. For those who would like to provide comment, please enter in the chat that you would like to do so, and I will call upon you in the order that I received the request. And again, this is not going to be the only one. If you just arrived, we will have an opportunity following the discussion today for public comment. Okay, I am not seeing any chats, so I'm just going to go ahead and move us forward. I do want to spend just a couple of moments reminding everyone that the state of Oregon has a responsibility to conduct government-to-government consultation with our tribal nations. I will be leading up an effort to do so, and that the effort will be a part of the course of our year's worth of OPAC consideration and review of these sites. And I just wanted to flag that that is something that will be ongoing. It will be government to government. And we will be reaching out to our tribal governments when we have all of the materials associated and packaged together in our proposal packets. That way they can have the most efficient use of time and an understanding about what's being proposed at each of these sites. And if we have messages or findings or thoughts that need to be communicated from that consultation, we will be bringing that back to the Ocean Policy Advisory Council if we do have those prior to their decision later this fall. So without further ado, I will actually stop sharing my screen and we will allow our Audubon Society partners to present the proposal to us, as well as any modifications that have been applied to that proposal in response to the original considerations. And Kent, I believe that's you, and I'm going to make you a co-host to allow you to do that. You should be able to share your screen now.
Thank you. It's just taking a minute to, oh, I got to log back in for some reason. It'll take me just a minute. It closed my, oh, there it is. Well, that's coming up, an opening. I just want to say thank you, Andy, for all your hard work on the strategy and the proposals, and thanks to each of you with the agencies, and particular thanks to those in the audience, including OPAC members. And I also want to give recognition to the group of volunteers at Audubon that has been really amazing to work with, and the dedication that they've shown. Some of them are on the call today. It's an honor to work with them as well as the rest of you on Rocky habitat issues. Can everybody see the screen now? Okay, let me know too if the sound quality goes down, then I'll turn off my video feed. Otherwise I'll leave it on.
You're sounding good for now.
Okay. A little bit about who Lincoln City Audubon is. We've been around for about 17 years. It's a chapter of the National Audubon Society. Our core programs include education, citizen science, and conservation. We serve Tillamook and Lincoln counties, which are about a third of the entire coastline. We're proposing Cape Lookout Rocky Habitats be designated as a marine conservation area to preserve its unique ecosystems, its biodiversity, and particularly its kelp forests, as well as maintain access for all users. As you may know, Cape Lookout was designated in 1994, but it was never implemented. The Cape is not like any other rocky habitat on the Oregon coast. It juts out into the sea more than a mile. It's sheer cliffs topped with old growth forests. Its rocky habitats is home to a diversity of species. And I'll give a shout out to Sean. Actually, I think this is his photo when he was doing a seabird survey. We've got the credit wrong. So thank you, Sean. And In addition to its beauty, the south, and I mentioned that it was designated in 1994. On the north side of the Cape, there's pockets of intertidal rocky habitats. And on the south shoulder of it, there's a large intertidal area. There's also subtidal canopied kelp forests that run along the south side of the Cape. And it's home to nesting seabird colonies. Particularly, there's the second largest colony of common murres on the coast. There's also, you can see on the front, there's a seal haul out and a sea cave. Samuel Boardman described Cape Lookout as one of Oregon's crown jewels, and I think most Oregonians would agree that it's a special place. Zooming in a little bit more to orient you, this is out of Sea Sketch. Our plan area, proposed plan area, is shown in blue. And the boundary on the south side of the Cape is pretty much identical to what, very similar to the 1994 designated boundary on the south side of the Cape and the tip. The Oregon Natural Heritage Program recognized Cape Lookout as an undisturbed standard in which to monitor environmental quality and an area to accumulate baseline data for coastal headland ecosystems. With that in mind, we included the north side of the Cape as well in our proposal so that it can be managed as an intact ecosystem. Camp Meriwether, it's a Boy Scout camp, sits immediately south of the Cape Lookout State Park, and the uplands on Cape Lookout are part of Cape Lookout State Park. So uses in the area include recreational, including charter fishing, commercial fishing. Bird watching is big. As we began waiting for the meeting to start today, I think we'd all agree it's a great place to go whale watching. Some interesting sightings. Tide pooling, diving, and surfing are all other activities that occur at the Cape. It's also an important area culturally and harvest-wise for the tribes. And as I mentioned earlier, Camp Meriwether is a Boy Scout camp immediately south of the Cape. They offer programming for school groups and families of campers. They have about 1,000 people come through their programs per year. And like all other state parks, Cape Lookout State Park is experiencing rapid growth in terms of visitation per year. So why a marine conservation area at Cape Lookout? First, to preserve its high quality, intact habitats. I think it's fairly unique. It has a lot going for it. An MCA I view as an excellent platform for collaborative kelp management. And I think we're all aware that we're facing a crisis with kelp with the overgrazing by sea urchins. A site designation brings focus. It fosters volunteers, grants, research, and most importantly, community engagement. A designation gives kind of the focus and attracts those entities. Also, of the 3 types of designations, we chose a marine conservation area for its regulatory flexibility to provide options for kelp restoration, such as culling the sea urchins. Stakeholder outreach was a big part of our campaign. We reached out to stakeholders for 3 reasons. We listened to their interests and concerns, and we built support for this designation, and we developed a community network that will help in its implementation. We use print media, social media, online petitions, webinars, phone calls, and one-on-one meetings to engage the public. And I think despite COVID limitations and unprecedented wildfires, 2020 was quite the year. I think we'd all agree. I think our outreach results are impressive. The petition that we submitted during the public comment period had 235 signatures. 166 people provided original unique comments. More than 600 people watched our video on Cape Lookout called Oregon Coast Rocks. Tillamook Pioneer published 2 articles on our Cape Lookout campaign. The City of Garibaldi City Council endorsed our campaign, stating in its letter of support, the designation balances protecting natural resources and ensuring continued access. We also met with Camp Merriweather to discuss our proposal and how we could work together, and we received a strong letter of support from the Boy Scouts of America Cascade Council, who runs the camp. We listened to stakeholders and responded to their concerns. Scuba divers asked if they'd be able to keep harvesting species within the MCA and anchor boats and kayaks. The answer to those questions was yes. I will mention the working group noted that the level of stakeholder engagement was good, but they noted several groups were notably absent, particularly Pacific Doryman's fleet and some of the chartered fishing boats out of Garibaldi. Again, let's keep in mind, 2020, we're grappling with how do we work as a society with COVID and unprecedented wildfires. Charter boats weren't going out. I walked the docks and no one was there. But during our development of the proposal, and particularly since, we've made a concerted effort to reach out to the fishermen, including charter boat operators, commercial fishing out of Garibaldi, Pacific Doryman's fleet. And we informed that when we listened to their concerns about access, fishing, and anchorage, and informed them that our designation proposal would not exclude access, would not change harvest regulations on fish, and would not preclude anchorage. I would mention one of the other uses of the Cape Lookout general area is fishing boats anchor there in the lee to get out of storms. We documented outreach with the fishing community and their concerns in our written responses to the working group's considerations back in April of 2021. Since that time, when we submitted that, we continue to do outreach with the fishing community and hear their concerns. And I'd mentioned if implemented, we look forward to working with the fishing groups, community groups, and engaging everybody in the implementation of this. I think it's a real opportunity to bring the community together. So our site-specific goal is to conserve to the highest degree possible the ecological functions of the rocky habitat resources in order to provide long-term ecological, economic, and social benefits for current and future generations. We have a number of management recommendations to meet that goal. And again, I'd suggest, I mentioned, our recommendations, they're really suggestions, and there's opportunity to talk today how we can make those recommendations best fit with agency needs and concerns. But we emphasize education, stewardship, and community involvement rather than a regulatory approach. We list specific metrics for each of our recommendations on how they can be evaluated. Our site-specific goals are best bet with stewardship and education, we believe. And we're very excited to be working with Camp Merriweather. They just completed a new environmental learning center at the camp. We've been in communication about programming for rocky habitats, and I think that there's some great opportunities. Other community engagement venues or programs within our recommendations include a biennial State of the Cape Symposium that would bring people together to talk about how the implementation's going, what's needed in terms of adaptive management, and keep it current. On the regulatory side, we're proposing no changes to commercial or recreational harvest regulations, no change to harvest of most commercial and recreational harvest of most invertebrates, specifically clams, Dungeness crab, red rock crab, mussels, pittock, scallops, squid, and sand shrimp would remain open. We also build in a clause that as fisheries evolve and harvests evolve, if ODFW wants to open up harvest to other invertebrates, we would not, this recommendation would allow for that. We do recommend a closure of kelp harvest for personal use in subtidal areas. And that would be, I'll talk about modifications in a moment. And then also I'll note that there'd be no change to access or anchorage. So the balance of my presentation and the discussion following it will focus on the considerations that the working group raised in the final recommendations for the site. Just to recall, I think Andy summarized it, but these considerations of the working group were noted that they should be addressed prior to OPAC making any recommendation. And we provided written response to those considerations about a year ago. So we've pretty much come full circle. We're glad to have these workshops and the opportunity to continue a dialogue. But the focus of today's workshop, I think, is on those considerations. And I'll go through some of the key ones, summarize our consideration, our response, and then we'll have opportunity to discuss it in more detail. So first off, one of the considerations was of the working group is that the proposal maintains status quo on management with minimal harvest restrictions. Our site-specific goal for the strategy's emphasis is on ecosystem-based management. And I think a key principle of that is to recognize that economic and social benefits are on par and just as important as ecological benefits. And we view it as they're fully compatible. A suite of ecosystem services assures engagement with a wide variety of interests in the area and better ensures success of the implementation. And we see that conservation's compatibility with sustainable harvest is really keystone to natural resource management in Oregon. And I think it's fundamental to ODFW's mission statement. The major change in status quo is community involvement in site-based management and stewardship at Cape Lookout. Camp Meriwether has expressed a strong intent to participate with us. And as I mentioned, they have a very new environmental learning center that would make a great venue. Also, building and executing a vision for kelp restoration with the public and agency partners is a big change from status quo. Enforcement was noted as a concern, and it may be challenged by capacity, safety, and costs. Enforcement of invertebrate and algae harvest regulations, if applied to the subtidal area, would be challenging offshore. In our suggested modifications, we suggest modifying the recommendation for invertebrate harvest restrictions. And again, that would be, most species are open, but it'd be closed to those that are not listed. That be applied only to intertidal areas, and there would be statewide regs for subtidal. With regards to kelp harvest, we're suggesting modifying our recommendation that only be applied to subtidal areas. That fits with the ecological dynamics of where urchin overgrazing is occurring in subtidal areas, as well as within the regulatory framework. And I think it eases some enforcement concerns. And with the point on invertebrate harvest not being in subtidal area, part of that would ease enforcement. The point of compliance is typically dockside, so it's difficult to determine where the source of the catch is. So having an intertidal areas, subtidal tends to be boat harvest, intertidal areas would be more shore harvest focused. As part of enforcement, it doesn't take care of all the needs, but I think it adds capacity and opportunities that well-trained volunteers can educate users to reduce violations that are simply stemming from uninformed visitors. Stewards can act as observers. We do concur volunteer training is essential. We suggest collaboration among community groups and agencies to establish trainings that ensure clear and consistent communications on state park rules, as well as other rules, from volunteers to the visiting public. and so that volunteers can act safely and be informative to the public in a good way. But I think together, let's find ways to add capacity to address enforcement concerns that work for everyone. The working group considered that the non-regulatory management recommendations may be too ambitious. We asked that recommendation number 9 with regards to invasive species monitoring be withdrawn, as it is regional rather than a site specific. We also had a recommendation to update the state park, Cape Lookout State Park comprehensive plan to incorporate the Rocky Habitat designation. If during today's discussion, OPRD believes that that is not an appropriate recommendation or suggests withdrawing it, we are supportive of withdrawing that recommendation. As stated in our proposal, one of the considerations was who's going to conduct all this monitoring. As we stated in our proposal, we have no monitoring or research expectations of the agencies beyond what is within their current management roles, responsibilities, and ongoing programs. Education, monitoring, stewardship projects will be community driven. As an example, monitoring of subtidal rocky habitat can be accomplished without adding capacity or additional programmatic obligations from the agencies. We've got a diver with us today who I think has been involved, but there's a coalition of mostly non-government entities, including volunteer divers, the Oregon Kelp Alliance, Reef Check, and others that are initiating plans to monitor kelp and hopefully restoration activities at Cape Lookout. Also want to clarify, there's a question, there were considerations on clarifying the capacity for level of support with respect to capacity, coordination, and stewardship of this proposal. And first off, it's our expectation that implementation of an MCA at Cape Lookout would occur over time, and that time is a tool to provide opportunity to grow capacity for the agencies as well as for the community. As I mentioned, we look forward to working with Camp Meriwether and stewardship programs, and that's part of our capacity. Programming will be primarily out of the camp, so it's our understanding that the responsible for training and managing volunteers would be within would be an obligation of the community groups, including Lincoln City Audubon. If volunteers are working within the state park itself, at the initiation of an invitation of the state park, then there need to be vetting and some training from the park. But even with the programs being community driven, implementation of non-regulatory managements, we recognize there's still coordination tasks for the agencies, particularly OPRD, since with the close proximity to Cape Lookout State Park. There was questions regarding signage. We anticipate seeking third-party signage and wanted to clarify that. But there are related capacity issues for OPRD. Therefore, with our modifications that we submitted, we also provided written on what our expectations are and our thoughts about expectations on the agencies. And that's certainly an area that I hope that we can discuss today. There were some considerations on the boundaries. I want to clarify our proposal for Cape Lookout has the mean high water line as the landward boundary. That's what our intent is, and I think that fits with what is DLCD expressed in their considerations. We are amenable. We can bring it up later on C-Sketch, but the north side boundary, it's got some wiggles in it. That's because we're following the 5-meter contour. We're amenable to working with the agencies if it would help in terms of implementation of smoothing that line out. We're certainly open to that. The plan area on the south side of the Cape is drawn pretty much as in 1994. It's inclusive of the kelp forests and a subtitle reef parallel in the shore. There were some considerations about the extent of subtitle, and that's why I mentioned that. Our proposal as written is consistent with management principles and the strategy. And I'd quote, "The interconnected relationships between the rocky shoreline areas, offshore sites, submerged rocky habitats warrants related areas be managed as an ecological unit." That's exactly what this proposal is aimed at. I think the current threat to kelp forests at Cape Lookout and elsewhere cannot be emphasized enough. This photo is actually from the kelp beds, or what were kelp beds at Cape Lookout, and you can see it's turning into an urchin barren. Recent diver surveys documented that purple sea urchins have literally decimated the kelp forests at Cape Lookout. And we need innovative partnerships between the public and agencies to tackle climate issues like the kelp forest crisis we're experiencing now. And I believe an MCA brings that shared focus and vision to make that a reality. So in conclusion, our management recommendations at Cape Lookout are consistent with the intent of the strategy to develop and implement an inventory of special places along the coast that benefit from site-based management. Many of our recommendations were also within the 1994 designation. The MCA designation fosters community involvement in implementing site-specific measures to address climate change, the loss of essential kelp forests, and the increasing use. Our intent is to maintain the pristine qualities while providing access to all users. Our management recommendations, again, are not mandates, but rather suggestions. I think they provide a framework for community and agencies to create a shared vision to manage this very special place. Thank you, and I look forward to a discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Kent. At this time, I would welcome clarification questions for Kent from our agency panelists. Any clarifying questions or thoughts? I have one, and it's really just a confirmation. I think actually with Laurel, the intertidal personal use kelp harvest amount is a gallon a day for personal use. So that would still be consistent with. So that would still be possible at this site with the recommendations for this group, correct?
That's what it sounded like. It was modified to only include the subtitle. So if it was within the ocean shore state recreation area from out to extreme low, then that would still be permissible with the 1 gallon of seaweed.
Okay.
Or kelp. And there's an annual limit too. So it's 1 gallon per day, 3 gallons per year.
Oh, it's good to have that additional measure. So there's an annual limit as well as a daily limit. I think that's helpful. Okay, if there are no further questions, then we do have a short break scheduled, and I want to honor that. So let's go ahead and do that, and let's reconvene at 9:25. Thank you, everyone. Reconvene at 9:25. All right, as we reconvene, please turn your video on or let me know if you're here with some sort of a chat. Thumbs up. I should mention we've been doing really well with raised hands, but to get to the raised hands function for panelists, it's in the reactions button menu. Looks like we got most folks back. Okay. Well, we are now entering the agenda item, which will be the majority of our focus today, which is a discussion about the site, the considerations and the recommendations and the modifications that have been made to the proposal that are designed to help address those. As a reminder to folks, this is going to be a panel discussion, which is between the proposal leads and agency staff. If you don't fall into one of those groups, then there will be a public comment period following our discussion. And the materials that we have to use to call as references are both provided on the website, and if we need them, I can provide links to each of these in the chat below. But what I have done is I have pulled out the main bullets from the final recommendation, which we will use to organize our discussion today. Those three bullets are the clarification on management effectiveness with respect to status quo, site monitoring and enforcement issues, the level of support with respect to capacity, coordination, and costs for stewardship activities and stakeholder engagement, and the reconciliation of the boundary issues, specifically the landward site boundaries and the north side boundary. So I'd like to organize our panel discussion today by kind of walking through these bullets, and I will now open up the discussion. And I see an applause from Kent. I'm not sure if that was meant as applause or if that was a question or a hand raise.
It's a hand raise.
All right, go ahead, please. Go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify, Andy, the list of materials available. It mentioned the final working group recommendations. Attached to that is the written response to considerations part of that document now.
Yes, there is both a written response that was attached to the initial recommendation, and then we had you submit proposal modifications in April of this year. So all of those pieces are available.
Thank you.
So let's go ahead and dive into our first bullet. One of the big questions was management effectiveness with respect to the status quo of the site. And I think that I'd like to start our discussion there. And I'm actually going to stop the share so that I can see everyone's faces and we can all see each other. And one of the big messages that I heard from your presentation is that designation changes the status quo because it allows the group as a whole to organize, to fundraise, and to build community support around the idea of the site proposal, which you would then argue is different from status quo. And there are management regulations which you do suggest, some of which you have modified, as I have heard, to make it simpler for enforcement issues. So questions or comments from any of my agency panelists around that topic? Go ahead, Dave. And oh, I see Jason's hand first, actually. So I'm going to give Jason the floor. And you're still on mute. Nope, you're still, there we go.
Sorry, I'm having a tough time with the mute today. I had
No
my
problem.
mic up. I guess for myself, clarification on what this will allow in the sense of coordination and community involvement beyond what the possibility is now.
Yeah, so I'll maybe, Kent, you want to ping pong that to one of your
Go
panelists
ahead.
or take that yourself?
Did you want to comment first, Andy?
No, I was going to allow your group to respond.
Okay. I've been asked before, well, can't you do all of this without a designation? Theoretically, yes. But what a designation brings is name recognition and status. Volunteers typically like to be a part of something. I think that's why we volunteer on things. So to be part of a marine conservation area, it draws volunteers in terms of grant writing, getting grants to implement this work, having a designation, big difference. So having the sure, we could do these things without it, but having a designation greatly aids that, and particularly kelp restoration. I think that's going to take some funding, even if it's a volunteer based. And it also kind of, and perhaps Dave could weigh in, if the area is identified in a designation area, it may make issuing a scientific collector permit a little easier. I don't know, but I think that's the main thing.
And I guess a follow-up question to that, do we have a good idea? Well, I guess maybe Sean might be able to help inform me if in particular, if you know, but what management efforts are taking place currently with the kelp beds, or if there's anything actively going on in that aspect?
Sean, we are not doing anything with the kelp beds. That would be other agencies involved in that aspect. We manage seabird colonies and associated resources like that, but nothing in the kelp bed arena.
Yeah. Okay.
I could address that a bit if.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. So we're working with the ORCA group, Oregon Kelp Alliance. They've applied for scientific take permits to do some kind of experimental urchin culling and restoration efforts. It's starting on the south coast, but they've identified Cape Lookout as one of the areas that they will expand to. So we'll be working with them on developing the permit for that effort as well. They just got a really big shot of funding. So they'll be able to, put some money, behind this effort, and they're getting well organized with volunteer divers and such. I mean, they were in the past, but they're getting much more effort along those lines. So they've identified a number of sites on the coast, and we'll start some efforts at eventually all those sites.
Just to piggyback on Dave's comments, I think Cape Lookout came on the radar out of the proposal and the work that's been done to recognize that there was a kelp crisis issue there. Divers brought it to our attention, and in terms of our outreach, and we incorporated that. And I know Orca's picked up on that. I've talked with Tom Calvanese, and we did an aerial video that showed the kelp beds where they are now and could be compared to historical, and vast changes.
Yeah, so in my view, the big broad answer is that you feel as part of a designation, you will be able to gain community traction and recruit funding for the effort to build an enhanced stewardship programs, potentially some monitoring programs, and community engagement and a stewardship ethic. Is that, I'm hearing that correctly? In terms of site monitoring, Kent, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about suggestions, or Laurel maybe has her hand raised. Both Laurel and Dave have their hand raised. So I'll allow them to proceed. I'm not sure if it's related to site monitoring or if it's related to the previous topic. So Laurel, go ahead.
I was just going to point out, I can't remember if I said this before for this particular location, but the Cape Lookout is designated in the Oregon Natural Heritage Plan, the Register of Natural Heritage Resources. I believe this group, we've already had that conversation, but I just wanted to point it out again as far as designation as a special area. It is designated in that document as one of not that many across the state.
Yeah, thank you, Laurel. I heard that in Kent's presentation as well. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I had kind of a number of notes, and I'm not sure they really which bullets they fit under,
Okay.
in your previous slide.
Sure.
Because those bullets were a little bit different than what we had yesterday, and a lot of them have to do with kind of the regulatory suggestions, and so the way our intertidal regulations generally work is we'll have in these designated areas is we have a something specific about invertebrate harvest, either completely closed or closed except for some list of species, which is being proposed here, and so generally on those we still will close it completely to commercial harvest. So we'll make those allowances for recreational harvest, but we'll have it be closed to intertidal, commercial harvest. And I think the management recommendation said that the regulation would apply to sport and commercial harvest. So I just wanted to clarify that we would probably still close it to commercial harvest of invertebrates. If we had that exception for commercial, it'd be the only spot on the coast that would have that kind of regulation. It'd be pretty confusing. So
Can we just, yeah, let's just stop there and let the group respond.
Yeah.
Kent, what was the intent? I believe it was both sport and commercial.
I think in our wording, we did not distinguish, but we'd have no problem having it closed to commercial within intertidal. I'd want to give opportunity for commercial fishing, though, to express their concerns on that, which would happen when it comes up, I guess, in front of OPAC.
And to be clear, the subtitle is still open, so any kind of sport or commercial fishing or invertebrate harvest would be open, under existing regulations. That's correct, right?
Yes.
Okay. Just wanted to be sure I understood that completely.
Can I just pause and we're not aware of any commercial invertebrate harvest at the site currently, correct?
Correct.
Well, there is within the subtitle, crab harvesting occurs, but
right,
I don't know of any
specific in intertidal. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and in the subtitle, the only thing we would know about, is crab harvest, which, obviously isn't on that rocky kelp bed area. It's, in the sand areas that would be, surrounding the Cape. And even the boundaries are so close to the Cape, there probably isn't too much, that happens.
Just for clarification, isn't it pretty standard practice adjacent to state parks that commercial harvest and the intertidal is not typically permitted? And we've had that conversation, but it's been like, 15 years or so. Sort of unofficial guidance from ODFW that, in places that are prone to recreational activity in the intertidal, that commercial harvest isn't typically allowed, or is that not true? I thought we've talked about that before, but
I can tell you what our regs are. I'm not sure what state parks.
oh no, yours. I'm asking you about yours, not ours. Yeah.
So our commercial harvesting intertidal requires a special permit, special commercial permit. So beyond the normal commercial fishing license, and that permit specifies no harvest in state parks on weekends and holidays. So it's kind of specific, to those times when the highest recreational use might occur, but it's still technically allowed, other times. And I think for razor clams, we might have a little bit different commercial regulation there, but I'm thinking more of the Rocky intertidal in this answer.
But even anecdotally, we're not aware of any commercial invertebrate harvest activity in the area. I would think that would be pretty challenging given access and.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
The other, well, another kind of clarification on boundaries. I understand the mean high water line in association with kind of land ownership and land management boundary, but our intertidal regulations will go up to extreme high water because those are species harvest regulations. They aren't really tied to land ownership at all. So we'll still probably, well, I know for sure we will write the regulation that way. So even if we have, so it might be a little confusing, we might have a site description that goes to mean high water, but the actual harvest regulation would go to extreme high water. And that does, most of the animals that would be harvested are below extreme high water, but there are some that extend above. Even mussels will get above that, and gooseneck barnacles, for example. And there's some, like tagula snails. There's animals that theoretically could be harvested, that occur above mean high water. So that's why we take our regulations basically all the way up to where you would anticipate kind of the end point where marine, organisms would not exist. But that's a detail we'll have to deal with in the kind of the implementation process. I also had a kind of a similar question that we had yesterday about algae harvest in the intertidal. And, we talked about, if an area is closed to some level of invertebrate harvest and it's a designation, state parks, current regulations kind of automatically close it to recreational algae harvest as well. And there's ways around that. But I'm wondering in this case, if we want it, if having it, closed to, this kind of sub list of invertebrates and then open to algae harvest, if that might, from both the ecological standpoint and just kind of a regulatory confusion, understandability standpoint might pose an issue. And one thing, at this site that might make a difference from an ecological standpoint is one thing we found in these areas where there's urchin, huge grazing pressure on kelp and causing an urchin barren. A lot of the invertebrates that are normally feed in the subtidal actually come up to the intertidal to feed on the algae there because there's still algae left. in the intertidal, and that, you know, it's been stripped from the subtidal. We saw that dramatically on the South Coast with abalone actually coming up to the intertidal and existing in the intertidal, because that's the only place there was food. And so if you have, you know, an algae harvest in the intertidal, then there could be some impact on that kind of, you know, kind of last resort escape mechanism for animals finding food that's been, you know, stripped from the subtidal. That's kind of an anecdotal thing, you know, we don't have like, you know, quantitative data proving that or anything, but that's something we observed, and other folks have seen that as well. And I guess maybe two questions maybe related to that, because, you know, the next question was, well, would anyone even be harvesting algae there? And one thing I don't have a feel for on the south side of the Cape is without counting, you know, the camp, how much visitation is there? Do we have data? Is there, you know, number of people per year, that sort of thing? And maybe state parks could address that question.
Jason, we have a parking lot counter at the top of the Cape, but it doesn't, I mean, that really doesn't estimate how many people are walking down that trail.
No, we just installed a parking counter up at the trailhead parking, and so our numbers are very recent only. But I would say the South Trail is one of the less used trails out of the Cape Trail, the North Trail. But in the summer it can get fairly high use, but nothing like the north side of the Cape. And then as far as the Boy Scout property, I don't have any idea of the numbers of their, you know, their groups or visitation that are visiting the beach there.
Okay. So there is a fair number of people that go down there then. It's not like a remote area where that's, yeah, almost impossible to get to.
No, yeah, it's primarily from the South Trail, but and a lot of surfing.
Right, yeah.
Is the use.
It's been years since I've hiked down there. One of my memories is when our kids were really little, we hiked down there with them, and then we had to carry them all the way back up in backpacks because they didn't want to walk back up the hill. So it's a fun memory of that site.
Steve, you have your hand up?
Yeah.
Yes, just anecdotally, I hike that trail perhaps twice a year, and I do it in good weather and it's not used very much. I meet very few hikers coming or going. It's used more by surfers who use the trail to get down to the beach.
Right.
Kent?
And then,
I'll just add, the camp has informed me they get about 1,000 people a year going through their programs right now.
And I guess another question about the camp. Do you think, and maybe you probably can't answer this, but there might be, you know, the camp would have different programs, right? And sometimes we see programs of kind of a food gathering type program, you know, cooking with, you know, natural products or something like that, which might, you know, encourage algae harvest. I don't know if the camp would do things like that, or if they have plans, or if that's something you've even heard about.
They've asked us to work with them on developing rocky habitats. So I think that there's opportunities to shape the programs there to be consistent with whatever is in place for an MCA.
Yeah, okay.
I guess what I'm hearing Dave say is that it might conform better to, or logically, to have kelp harvest prohibited from both the subtidal and intertidal, if that's more consistent with state parks rules associated with designations. Am I hearing that correctly, Dave?
That's what I'm thinking. Although, you know, the kelp harvest is not in my agency's jurisdiction, so I don't want to like say this is an absolute, but I'm just throwing it out there as a something to think about.
And as I said yesterday, if this were designated, that wouldn't require additional rulemaking. It would be sort of the default rule for a protected area would be no collection.
So it
I
would
mean,
make
that's
it
the case,
easier.
that's the, like I
for-
said yesterday, it's the case for existing marine gardens and research reserves is souvenir collection. You know, the 1 bucket, 2 bucket is not allowed. 1 to 3 buckets, 1 per day, 3 per year is not allowed in the protected marine reserves and protected other categories.
Yeah, another, we talked about that more yesterday, but another complicating factor that, I didn't bring up yesterday, even though it's because it's way down in the weeds, in the kelp weeds, I guess. But, one of the popular food kelps is Alaria, which, or wakabi, with it, however it's pronounced, but the genus name is Alaria. And it exists pretty much right around mean low water. So some of it's in the subtitle and DSL jurisdiction, some of it's in the intertidal and state parks jurisdiction. Your jurisdiction's the jurisdiction difference is mean low water, Laurel, is that correct?
The ocean shore goes to extreme low.
Oh, goes to extreme low. Okay. Okay, but I think you still have that with Alaria and some other species that they could potentially exist both in below extreme low and above.
Oh yeah, they're
plan-
definitely in the intertidal at an extreme low tide. You can reach
Yeah.
a lot of those species of interest. Yeah, for sure.
But someone could theoretically say, well, I got these from the subtitle. I found extreme low water and took a few steps beyond that and harvested them. So it really poses an enforcement issue if you have kelp closed in the subtitle and open in the intertidal.
I think 1 piece of Alaria would pretty much fill your 1 gallon bucket.
Yeah. Anyway, that's a detail, but it just makes it's just one additional enforcement challenge. The other last thing I had, just wanted to say something about enforcement in that, we talk a lot about, enforcing these sorts of regs, but I think a lot of that discussion almost makes the assumption that there's nothing to enforce right now. So we're going from a situation where there's no regulations to a situation where you have regulations, but all these harvests, every species, it's all regulated. It all has bag limits currently. So the enforcement challenges that we're talking about, for these particular areas is really no different than the existing enforcement challenges that happen there. And I don't know if that changes the discussion at all, but it still has the same basic kind of enforcement challenges at these sites.
Yeah, Dave, I think that's a really important point because I don't want there to be the impression that we're going from a baseline of no enforcement to all of a sudden enforcement at a level that's, significantly greater. I think, for many of the proposals, it's a little step up in terms of, specific interest in algae harvest in I guess most cases that we're talking about here. Jason?
Yeah, and just a little bit more perspective on that enforcement topic, and I completely understand David's point on that. And we all are already enforcing rules on both the south side and the north side of the Cape on the ocean shore. I think the biggest concern for OPRD and specifically from the management unit here is the north side in particular, just because it sees so much visitation. And even amongst us who are familiar with these designations, at least to some extent, there's parts of it that are a little confusing to us and unclear. And so the general user, concern is that they see a conservation area and they automatically think that, well, not everyone, I don't speak for people, but they think that nothing should be taken, from the ocean shore, nothing should be collected. And that's, I guess, the major concern is enforcement wise, and that the increased volume of enforcement call outs for staff, in particular on the north side, is a topic of concern for us.
Yeah, Kent, go ahead.
I'll respond to that, Jason. We discussed that before, and certainly it's a consideration. I mean, volunteers are by no means a substitute for real enforcement, but volunteers, if they're well trained and have consistent in that training, I think can add to some of that opportunity for both people that might harvest something and they simply aren't informed of why things are protected. I think it would also be a tool to help educate about what a marine conservation area designation is that Rocky habitat designations are intended to both protect and allow access, unlike a marine reserve where it's an exclusion zone. So I think that there really is an education element there that takes time. And I'm not saying that that would eliminate that concern, but I think there's an opportunity to contribute to that. Now, if volunteers are working on the north side of the park, they'd be clearly in the park. So it would be up to the state park as to what training occurs. But I think just developing programs for, and really it's kind of a statewide opportunity so that there's some consistency up and down the coast of volunteers in these programs. But we certainly would invite and encourage the community groups and agencies to work together on a good training program.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty good segue organically to our second bullet. And I just want to make sure that we've kind of given enough time and space for discussion about the first one. So we did have discussions about management effectiveness with respect to the status quo. We talked about enforcement, and in particular there may be easier to enforce an algae harvest restriction if it was consistent from the subtitle to the intertitle. We did talk about site monitoring, which, the best information we have is really how many people are coming to the region from either the north side at the state park, the south side from the camp, or from the parking lot at the top, and then walking down into the site. Were there any other thoughts, comments about those kind of big broad topics before I think our conversation is beginning to naturally turn towards support with respect to agency capacity, coordination, and costs? Any further thoughts on that first bullet? Okay, well, let's go ahead and move into that next subject of kind of expectations for the community group involvement and the generation of programs and capacity to help with education and enforcement and stewardship of a site if it were to move forward. I think it was very valuable to see in the recent submissions documentation of the conversation between expectations around what parks would need to be involved with, and in particular I think signage was one of the big topics. And so I was pleased to see some of that conversation documented and has occurred. Any further thought on kind of development of signage or stewardship programs that would help with enforcement of a site?
I would just be careful about saying, stewardship programs related to enforcement because, volunteers shouldn't be doing enforcement activities on the beach. It puts them in a difficult position. So providing interpretation information is a valuable function of volunteers, but providing enforcement is the role of law enforcement agencies and people trained. So just,
Thank you, Laura.
how you say
don't
it,
want
I
to,
think is important.
It
Yeah.
is important. And I don't want to mishmash those two things inappropriately. I'm interested in conversations that the group had with potential funders with, I guess, potential levels of support. I know that that's not a required documentation for a site to move forward, but I think it's important for the group to know. I think that was, one of the reasons that OPAC felt strongly about the other two sites that move forward for designation. And I think what I've heard so far through your presentation is most of the conversations are associated with a designation coming into being would be really helpful with the group being able to basically apply for grants and receive funding to kind of build a program. Do you want to elaborate on that at all, Kent, or anyone from the panel?
I'll elaborate on that a bit and also invite Steve to comment on that. I think Audubon, Lincoln City Audubon's got a good track record and well recognized as a leader in conservation along the Oregon coast. So I think that we do have grant capabilities. Oh, and Dawn's on the line too, so I think I'll let her comment primarily on that. In addition to our capabilities, ORCA has been actively pursuing grant opportunities. They've got a big grant for some sea urchin ranching and other research. So there's opportunities out there. I don't think that I can't specify exactly what they are, but I think that there's opportunities. Dawn, do you have any comments?
Just that we have done some signage projects with other groups in partnership with other groups, and we're able to obtain either National Audubon Society funding or grant funding for specifically designated sites. For instance, Alder Island, we did a partnership with U.S. Fish and Wildlife and did interpretive signage there. So like Kent said, we have a record of being able to do this at designated sites and obtain the funding. We also have access to some wonderful artists and photographers here in Lincoln and Tillamook counties both. So yeah, we didn't pursue specific funding for this. Obviously, since it, there's this is still in proposal phase, but we don't foresee any issues either with working with the regulatory agencies or with obtaining funding for a designated site. Does that help? Does that help? So
It does. Thank you, Laurel.
Sorry, I'm getting all my sites mixed up. If it's possible for you to remind us what the plan was for the signage. I know you had some discussions with Jason in the past, but just, setting expectations for what's required for signage within state parks. I think we've had that conversation, but it's been a while. So I just thought it would be helpful, if that's part of the plan, there is a process. It needs, there needs to be contractors that are approved by OPRD, messaging. It can take a long time in certain locations to figure out a location where you can even put a sign because of various considerations related to protection of resources. So just so that, we don't set expectations that there even is a place where we could put a sign in a place that you might think is a good location. There could be a lot of barriers to doing that.
yeah, that's sorry, that's why we put together that brief little document about this is kind of what we're expecting, and how we propose to work together with you. And like I said, we absolutely would work together with you on if anything were to be, if there were to be signage up at top, for instance, at the trailhead, that type of thing. So yeah, we understand that and can, like with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Project, there was a huge document that we had to abide by: font type, size, the size of logos, the colors, all of that, and that's no problem. Absolutely, we intend to work with you on that.
Yeah, and Jason could probably speak to more, there are a lot of considerations. I mean, even if you want to put a sign, even if we want to put a sign some places, sometimes we just can't put a sign there. So just so that you know that it's possible that there might not be a good spot in a place that you think this would be this would be a great spot for a sign. We've got a lot of situations where we're like, this would be a great place for an interpretive sign, but we can't put one there. So just so you know.
Okay, yep, we get that.
And one of the things with putting the expectations documented, it was really the signage is at the discretion of state parks. And we wanted to note, while we would pursue funding for the signage, we recognize that state parks still has a lot of work to do in terms of all cultural practices, signage requirements, ADA. There's certainly, there's tasks and capacity for the parks.
And we have a lot of time to put that into place.
That's great. Kent, do you still have a comment? Your hand is still, nope, okay. Any further thoughts on that topic? I think that does a fair bit to level set expectations in association with that consideration.
I was going to say something that's related. You brought up the master plan before, and it was done not that long ago. I mean, this isn't about signage necessarily, but there is a tie-in to signage, which is what reminded me that we probably wouldn't update the master plan to incorporate this, but at the time that the master plan was updated, of course, we would bring, if a new site was designated, that's part of our process, is describing the current situation in the park. So, and there's often interpretive planning that goes along with some of those master plans. It depends, it varies from park to park and region to region, but the themes that are appropriate for a location are part of that discussion during those processes that are open to the public. So that's the tie into the signage, because they talk about interpretation in the park as part of that master planning process that occurred not that long ago, because I was involved, so that wasn't that long ago. So I don't imagine, given the timeline of our other master plans that are out of date, that this would come up anytime soon. But just so you know that would be part of any update. We would incorporate designations that are appropriate at the time of rewriting the master plan. But this type of activity wouldn't trigger that. Usually stuff that triggers a master plan is like needing to redo the park, the campground, or some other development within the park.
Yeah, I think it was completed in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
So if we modify that recommendation, that according to the schedule of the master plan, this would be considered at that time. Something to that effect. I'd have to wordsmith it.
Yeah, at the time that it was updated, it could be pulled into the description of the existing designations and protections at the site, which we do for other master plans. So
Yeah, that's a good catch, Laurel. Because I'm hearing that there's no issue with updating the master plan to include a new designation. It's just that the timing may be dictated by other capacity needs and the time or the schedule for state parks to do so.
yeah, it just wouldn't trigger reopening the master plan for doing this. It would just, whenever, if at whatever time the
Yep.
agency decides to do it for another reason, we could pull that in if there were a designation.
Great. Okay, well, does the group want to move on to the last bullet, which is the reconciliation of boundary issues, which I think I'll try and give us a launching point for that, which is I've heard clearly through Kent's presentation and through the amended modification that they were fine with a mean high water upper boundary. Dave Fox did provide clarification that any regulations for intertidal invertebrate harvest or organism restrictions would go to likely extreme high water. But I think that, in terms of describing the boundary, mean high water makes sense. There is no kind of existing statutory vegetation line established because the state parks owns the uplands. So, accepting a mean high water upper elevation point alleviates the concern in the original proposal recommendations. Laurel, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I was just going to say that the point we made about the statutory vegetation line was just because it's a state park, there isn't a line delineated. So I don't know, if there's a conflict with ODFW's regulations, it was just the point of the statutory vegetation line. It could be extreme high, or, if that was cleaner with ODFW regs. It's just, we don't have a statutory vegetation line delineated in that location because it's owned by the agency.
Yeah.
Although doesn't part of the proposed area come about private ownership or Camp Meriwether ownership?
On the south side, it would.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the north side would be all OPRD, adjacent to OPRD, but.
So there may be some.
Maybe I can go look and see where it starts again.
Yeah.
Our intent has always been that the mean high water mark be the upper landward boundary.
And I don't see that as a conflict with our regulations. That's just our consistent regulation on the whole coast. So the particular boundary of an area doesn't, in my mind, doesn't have to exactly correspond with our regulations, as long as we're covering the area proposed.
I think the point being made, though, that mean high water wouldn't, if land ownership there was associated with the camp, it would not have any sort of overlap. So, that would make it cleaner from a land ownership perspective on the south side.
It's within the ocean shore,
okay,
regardless, but yeah.
And I do want to mention the other part of this bullet issue was the acknowledgement by the Cape Lookout proposal team that they would be happy to work with us on kind of amending the north side boundary to maybe to not be as I don't know what's the right word I'm looking for, jaggy. I don't think that's quite it, but there was agreement that we could slightly modify this to represent a closer line to the intertidal region. Do you have any comments about that, Kent? Or I see Jason. Jason raised his hand. Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, just for a topic of discussion in adjusting that line on the north. I don't know, Andy, if you have access to a closer view of that north side handy, but In adjusting that, I think a lot of the enforcement issues that we have concerns about could be eliminated or could be helped if that line were further out on the Cape to the west, so that it would not include the area where a high volume of people are recreating on that north side. And I think it would still accomplish the goal of preservation of that intertidal zone, because there aren't any tide pools on in that area. So just throwing that out there for discussion. If it were further out, the line were delineated further west, then I think it could be a clear message to the public of where that line is, and then there would be less possibility for enforcement issues.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'm hearing that if it started slightly further west and maybe a little bit south, so it was kind of at the beginning of the. I'm not as personally aware of where the rocky habitat would start here. So let me toss this to our Cape Lookout panelists. What is your thought about kind of beginning the line on the north side?
Sure, we could. We're very amenable to working with you. We could propose a line that then run it past you to see if that fits. And then also, it's my understanding to make a more simplistic polygon rather than following the 5-meter contour would make enforcement and designation a little bit easier. But we're very amenable to adjusting it on the north side.
Great.
Jason, could we meet with you perhaps via Zoom at some point to go over the map and see what your suggestion is as to what the boundary might be more appropriate on the north side?
Yes, absolutely. And I'd also invite our, we have a new ranger supervisor at the park, and he's very familiar with the Cape and the tide pools and everything. So I'll invite him as well. And he's also very knowledgeable about the Boy Scout property and their operations. I wish he could have sat in today, but yes.
So it sounds to me like the, go ahead, Laurel.
Oh, I was just going to suggest maybe I'm going to be up there with Simon to do some plover stuff. We could go out and like take a point, in a place that for enforcement purposes, the beach ranger, and other staff, we could go out and just sort of figure out logistically what makes sense from an enforcement standpoint on the beach and share that with you guys, if that would be valuable.
Sure, or we'd be happy to go out there with you. So maybe a couple people from our team go with you and we can talk about
just figure
that.
out what makes sense for enforcement purposes, like on the beach.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm wishing they had done that in some of our plover areas. So I'm just like, let's go out and figure out where it makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
To me, it sounds like that that consideration is easily addressed via a small boundary change in agreement between OPRD and the proposal team, and that's so I believe that would alleviate any of that concern.
So a question on that. I was a little confused. Would the line be such that the rocky intertidal area on the north side would still be included in the site or be excluded from the site?
I guess I heard included at a point that made sense to the parks team from an enforcement standpoint.
Yes.
Yeah, a lot of it's not readily accessible at most times. It's like a strip that hugs the edge. I mean, it's sort of dangerous too. So
and there's other recreational issues, I guess, on that side. There's paragliding and parasailing, which wouldn't necessarily affect any of these proposed regulations or anything, but perceived by the public, it could be. But if it were a little bit further out, yeah, it could help in that sense as well.
And some of that intertidal habitat, there's a few coves as you get out further towards the tip on the north side where that intertidal is.
Just curious, where do people begin a paraglide in the region? Is that from higher up the hill and they fly over the Cape, or they're not launching off of the Cape?
Oh, yeah, they are.
Almost at the base of the
they
Cape.
are.
Yeah, it's there's a place that's called Anderson's Viewpoint, and it's yeah.
Let me
I'd say,
pull up our map again.
yeah, it's kind of where the north side of where the there you go.
I can turn on your state parks layer if we need.
Yeah, it's I don't know that Anderson's Viewpoint necessarily will come up on the map. If you scroll in a little bit and move your cursor to actually to the north, right in the just at the very south or bottom of the screen here. It's along, yep, right around in there. It's right off of the road. And yeah, they go from there and paraglide from there. And actually at times on the tree line along the Cape right there, they will we've had quite a few incidents right there where paragliders are stuck in trees actually. Last year, most recently, that happened, and luckily the gentleman but had to get rescued by the Coast Guard helicopter. But they'll actually we've had several incidents where they end up in the ocean right there as well.
So it seems pretty close to where the original line was drawn on the north side.
Yep.
But obviously somebody paragliding wouldn't be harvesting or doing anything in the intertidal.
Correct.
Unless they're landing there.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I'm sensing that we're coming to a close on the 3 bullets that I had on our list from a considerations perspective. Are there any other thoughts or questions from our agency panelists to the group, or from our panelists to agencies? If not, I'll go ahead and try and summarize what I think I've heard for the 3 of them. Let me pull up my presentation again. Are you seeing that now? Kent, it looks like you have your hand raised. Would you go ahead?
As a comment, kind of then lead to your closing wrap up, I'm just really pleased to see the gains in collaboration that came with our workshop last summer and the strategy revisions to the strategy. It's carried over in today's conversation to talk things about working together on the north side boundary. It's very refreshing and much appreciated. And I think it's really going to make a difference in terms of not only if this implementation goes through, but the strategy as it moves forward. So thank you.
Thank you for those words, Kent. So not seeing any other hands, I'm going to take a shot at summarizing what I've heard during the discussions this morning. And then I'll provide an opportunity for clarification or additions. So what I heard on the first bullet was that a designation of this site in particular would really change the status quo by allowing the community to advocate and build support potential funding for enhanced education and stewardship programs that would be associated with the site that could help in a non-regulatory way handle monitoring and inform enforcement issues while not targeting those directly. That there were suggested revisions to the Cape Lookout site from the management measures perspective that would help with enforcement issues that were originally identified as challenges given the remote nature of the site. That there is ongoing work to build support with respect to capacity and to coordinate with entities in the area to build on stewardship programs with some increased documentation about expectations associated with some of the management recommendation activities that would require funding, in particular signage. That there is a community of stakeholders that has been engaged. We heard a lot about a great level of engagement, even coincident with the original proposal submission, but there has been continued stakeholder engagement since, in particular targeted at the fishing communities to the north and south. That's out of the Port of Garibaldi with charters, or out of Pacific City with the dorymen. That there has been a number of efforts made to communicate and build a bridge between different types of users focused around stewardship of this particular site, in particular around the issue of submerged aquatic vegetation, or our kelp beds, which provide kind of an ecosystem foundation for many of our species. Lastly, on the reconciliation of the boundary issues, it's clear the group is not requesting any activities above the or up to the statutory vegetation line, so that the boundaries at mean high water are acceptable. That being said, that management recommendations have an ability to impact what happens above the statutory vegetation line, being a continuum of habitats from the upland into the intertidal. And lastly, there's agreement to continue to work on the north side boundary with respect to a place that makes sense from a parks and recreation enforcement perspective and education perspective. So I will stop there and ask if anybody has anything that they'd like to provide clarification or comment on that I may have missed. Okay, I'm not seeing any chats or anybody waving at me with your hands, so I'll take that as a job well done. And at this time, I will now move us forward into our public comment, our next public comment opportunity. So if there's anybody who has been a member of the public and listening in, please raise your hand or enter in the chat that they would like to provide a comment. And I see Kurt with his hand up. Kurt.
Yeah, hi, thank you all. I'll make a few points quickly. First, all your involvement, either vocationally or avocationally, has been just really inspirational throughout this. The proposal's excellent, and so just bravo to the group. I've been diving this site for years and have just watched the devastation from the purple sea urchins of the kelp forest that did exist. And I'm really, energized to be part of the solution going forward. And I think this designation can be a huge help for that. Second point I'd make, just to add a little color around some of the urchin culling efforts that were discussed earlier. The initial effort at Nellie's Cove in Southern Oregon is going to be expanded up to Cape Lookout and Pacific City in the northern central coast. And we have Reef Check actually doing a baselining survey the weekend of May 20th, after which we're going to be free to run some urchin culling efforts at Cape Lookout. So those will be underway, and I'm excited to see how this designation, assuming it goes through, can be a tailwind to those efforts going forward. They'll go on for years and will require a lot of concerted effort from a number of parties and funding. So I just am really looking forward to hopefully shifting from discussion of the MCA designation towards how the MCA designation can be used to further and reinforce those efforts at restoring our reefs and kelp forests. So again, thank you all, and appreciate being a part of this session.
Thank you, Kurt. Charlie Plavin is next, and then I think Joe.
Thanks. For the record, my name is Charlie Plavin. I'm the Oregon Policy Manager for Surfrider Foundation. I also sit on OPAC and was previously on the Rocky Habitat Working Group, part of this process. I really appreciate this discussion, all the work that's been done here by the proposers, and the collaboration as well between the agencies on a myriad of issues at this site, like the work with Orca and the urchins. My concern around capacity to implement these, and I've mentioned this elsewhere in my capacity at Surfrider, I deal with this. Laurel knows this well. All the agencies know this well. I'm asking right now currently and trying to fill budgets for existing designations so that we can meet some of the expectations of the public around those designations. So for any new designations, I really do have concerns around our capacity to implement. That doesn't make me opposed to them. That just makes me feel like they need to be met with money, and they need to be met with a budget. I do have requests out to all the agencies right now, like I said, for existing designations on how we can improve capacity around those places to meet expectations of the public. That being said, I'd really like that to be carefully thought about in this site, how we can leverage existing relationships. Some of the stakeholder concerns with the fishing community, they concern me, but I don't think that they're insurmountable. And I've had a lot of discussions with the proposers about the idea of stewardship area designations prior to a formal designation in an MCA capacity. This would allow time to build both the financial demonstration as well as the community capacity and buy-in. And I saw that approach work really well in other communities in Oregon. It might be a great approach here if this isn't met with a designation at this time. One of the things I really thought would have been great in the Rocky Habitat process was to have this kind of stewardship designation, which sort of front-loaded more or less the idea of a formal designation and allowed time to build the community capacity. So again, I appreciate everybody's work here, and I look forward to seeing this evolve and come to OPAC.
Thank you, Charlie. Joe.
Yeah, hello all. My name's Joe Liebesite, staff scientist, Portland Audubon, member of OPAC. And I just wanted to thank everybody for the great discussion. I think this is great to see in this process now, where this is back and forth that we all talked about, and we're seeing it happening today, and very fruitful discussion. I just wanted to maybe touch on a little bit on the funding part that was discussed, and it ties into what Charlie said as well. I think there is definitely a lot of interest in funders on these sites. I think a lot of it hinges on whether they get designated or not. You know, you can't put funding in something until there's a designation in place. But I think we need to remember these are long-term plans that are being outlined here. I think Audubon Lincoln City has done an amazing job in outlining this very meticulously in their proposal, and sorting out these issues today is important to move forward. But yes, I can say from Portland Audubon's standpoint, we are heavily invested in these sites. We've all recognized the Kelp issue, climate change, increasing human impacts, wildlife disturbance, and all that are things that are going to be going on, are things that are going to be stressing this part of our coast for years. And so we are heavily invested in providing more capacity. So we have a full-time person on the coast now to help with community science, and they'll be able to plug into these proposals, or plug into these sites once they're designated. And touching on what Charlie said, we're also engaged at trying to get support into agencies' budgets to implement TSP3 moving forward, because it's so important. And part of that could also mean money for groups to steward sites through a, some type of RFP program. So these are things that we are working on, and we'll continue to work on for years if need be, to make sure that TSP3 is successful in the long term. So I'll stop there. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Joe. Is there anybody else that would like to provide comment? Okay, I'm not seeing any chats or hands being raised. So I'm going to move us along on our agenda, which is to talk about next steps. So as mentioned at the beginning of our conversation today, I will work with my agency partners to produce a summary documenting any of the remaining considerations associated with this site. The proposal team will be allowed to generate a cover letter for with their thoughts communicated to OPAC and to the agencies as in response to the conversation that we had today. Those pieces of information will be compiled in a package of materials that will be distributed to OPAC. The Ocean Policy Advisory Council, OPAC, will then meet, and the proposal teams will be allowed to present to OPAC and engage in a question and answer dialogue session with the council, hopefully this June. And then OPAC will be asked to make a decision about these sites at their fall meeting. In particular, I want to provide a little bit more detail in terms of public comment opportunities. And this is actually something that came up in the Fogarty Creek conversation and workshop that we had. And that is a suggestion to for agencies to work together to put a notice in locations associated with any of the designations to invite public comment, either in support or ask questions, just to let them know that there's an opportunity for their engagement in association with the OPAC meetings in June or later this fall. So comments may be accepted in writing ahead of the meeting or oral testimony during the meeting. Lastly, the commission, if it moves forward to adopt the rule amendments, any designations that come out of the OPAC meeting, there will also be public comment opportunities there. And as a reminder, I will be bringing any of the findings from our tribal consultation efforts to OPAC in the fall, so that any of those comments or considerations can be used to inform the OPAC decision. And with that, we are at the point in our agenda where we can adjourn. I guess in other meetings, I just wanted to provide an opportunity for anyone to provide a question, clarification question or comment. But otherwise, I just want to thank everyone for their participation and to let you know that I'm looking forward to the next phase where we will bring this discourse to OPAC. All right, hearing and or seeing none. Thank you, everyone. Have a great morning. And I will see some of you maybe later this afternoon for the Black Lock Point further evaluation workshop. Thank you.